The SEC has long been considered the pinnacle of college football in terms of conference play. For a number of years now, the SEC has just been seen as the better conference, the more talented conference. Everything they do is better than everybody else in all of college football. And it has been summarized in their phrase of it just means more. Welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I am your host, JR. We are going to be talking about the SEC and how the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is shrinking right now. And actually, their gap with the rest of college football is shrinking as well because of some factors going on in college football right now that is changing the sport forever. And the sport will continue to change. It's not just for now, but the sport will continue to change, and we'll see probably where we are after next season as well. Please do like and subscribe if you like Big Ten content. If you like a Big Ten school, we cover all the Big Ten schools here at the Big Ten Huddle. So check us out. We would love to have you subscribe and join us for a live episode. Also comment. Let me know what you guys think on all of these points and everything going on in college football as well. As I do think that this is a very intriguing conversation, as it does pertain mostly to the SEC. It does mean a lot for all of college football, and particularly the Big Ten as well. The rise of NIL and the transfer portal has changed the landscape of college football immensely, leading to significant shift in power and weakening the SEC's dominance that we have seen for some time now. The decline in depth for a lot of these SEC teams can be attributed to NIL and the transfer portal, and the rise of other conferences, especially the Big Ten, is really testing that depth right now. The SEC has long been known as the best conference in college football, and for good reason, too. They've won 13 of the last 15 national championships, and the general perception of the most talented conference, you really couldn't dispute it for that amount of time, just with what they were able to do as a conference, their record versus other conferences. But what has been most annoying is that even when it seems clear that teams in, say, the Big Ten or even the Big 12 or the ACC at times, the SEC has been given the benefit of the doubt. This is what a lot of people mean when they talk about SEC bias, talking about how SEC teams are just favored in rankings and playoff discussions and so many other different places just because they play in the quote unquote best conference in college football. Well, this perception is beginning to shift in 2024 as we've seen talking heads like Paul Feinbaum and Mark Spears and others talk about the shift of the SEC and how they are no longer dominating in the same way that they once were. But if you want an example of this SEC bias that is still going on today, it's not completely gone. Check this out as Andy Staples and Ari Wasserman made their top 10 way too early top 10 for next year. Now, mind you, we've not even played the semifinals of the college football playoffs yet, but some people just can't help themselves. They have to put content out there, even if it is moronic. Texas at number 1, Oregon at number 2, Ohio State number 3, Penn State number 4, number 5 is Notre Dame, number 6, Georgia. That all sounds pretty realistic, right? I mean, these are many teams that have good recruiting classes coming in and perform well this year. Well, it gets very interesting as South Carolina at 7 makes no sense. South Carolina got outcoached and outclassed and outperformed in so many ways against Illinois. South Carolina was lucky that game did not get out of hand and they did not lose that game by more than they did. Illinois only beat them 21-17, but quite frankly, they could have beat them by more, if not for a few things going against Illinois in that game. Clemson at number 8. Clemson was terrible this season, and Clemson didn't do all that much in the transfer portal, and they just continued to seemingly get worse year in and year out. Maybe not so much in the SEC, in the ACC, as the ACC continues to get worse, but in all of college football, they do not look nearly like the powerhouse they once did, and unfortunately, they continue to get that thought process of being a top 10 school when they've shown very little evidence of being that. Number 9, Florida, who all they have is DJ Lagway, and they have a coach in Billy Napier who should have been fired earlier this year, but if it wasn't for the school wanting to save some money for their students because of the athletic budget, the revenue sharing being used for paying players and stuff like that, they probably would have fired him this year, but they ultimately did not do so. There was nothing that Florida did this year, and there's nothing they did in recruiting. There's nothing they've done in the transfer portal to lead anybody to believe they should be a top 10 team, other than the fact that they are in the SEC. And finally, this one's even worse, Auburn at number 10. Auburn had a good recruiting class this year. Auburn has a good transfer portal class, according to 24/7. But overall, Auburn has been a terrible program. Under Cam Newton, when he was there, that was really their only success that they had. And other than that, they've been dominated by Alabama. They've been an afterthought in the SEC. Hugh Freeze has come there and flashed some money around and trying to do his best to try and get some hype. But overall, this Auburn team is not good. And other than them being in the SEC, they really have no leg to stand on for being in the top 10 for next year, completely passing by teams who do deserve consideration for the top 10 next year. If you're looking at the results of this year and the type of talent they are bringing in through the transfer portal, you're talking about teams like Michigan, Illinois, who should be considered for this, but ultimately will not be because they are not in the SEC. Really, the impact of the NIL and the transfer portal are what is causing a lot of the issues with the SEC no longer being one of the best conferences, if not the best conference in all of college football. You see, the transfer portal began in 2018 and didn't truly impact anything until about 2021 when Jamison Williams went from Ohio State to Alabama. If you remember correctly, Jamison Williams was the fourth string wide receiver at Ohio State. Ohio State known for producing first round wide receivers by the many, but Jamison Williams did not want to sit and wait his turn at Ohio State. Probably just one more year. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave were drafted in the first round that next draft as well, but instead he went to Alabama to be a star wide receiver, become a first round talent, and be considered one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. That really impacted things as the very next year, Quinn Ewers also left Ohio State, and Quinn Ewers went into the portal to become the starting quarterback at Texas for that next year. Obviously, making far more in NIL as a starting quarterback at Texas rather than the third or fourth string quarterback at Ohio State. Quinn Ewers had not played a down of college football. He played 3 snaps, I believe, at Ohio State. Had not played very much college football at all, not nearly enough to be considered any type of experience, but because of his incredibly high recruiting ranking, he was able to go to Texas and have the hype, and obviously he had the skill to do it as well, but really became the star hype player right off the bat because of his recruiting rankings in there. You also saw Caleb Williams go to USC, but that was much more because of Lincoln Riley going from Oklahoma to USC, so a coaching change there didn't really impact things. But another thing that did impact things is Jordan Addison going from a smaller program to a larger program to contend and make more money. Jordan Addison started his career at Pitt, and then when he moved on to a program that many believed would be a contender in the college football playoffs that next year, as they almost were in USC, but they eventually were not able to make it because of the Caleb Williams injury that happened in the Pac-12 national championship or Pac-12 championship game, which eventually would knock them out of the college football playoffs. These are the key issues for the SEC, as both of these players, and Quinn Ewers and Jamison Williams, left Ohio State, and many others saw the advantage of if you are a top tier talent in college football, you don't have to sit behind other top tier talents. You are able to go elsewhere and play early, start your draft stock, start your development early, and this is what has become one of the biggest issues for the SEC. Even Mark Spears, the former LSU player, he talked about this when he said that many times in the SEC he would explain it like this: you have top tier Heisman first round caliber talent being backed up by Heisman first round caliber talent. He said in the SEC for years, your second, your third team players were often more players that were going to be drafted in the first round and going to possibly be Heisman Trophy finalists. These players are transferring rather than waiting for their turn to start making the depth that once was so defined in the SEC much thinner. A great example of this year has been Michigan, who has had an influx of cash in the NIL, which is good for them, but they have utilized that cash in multiple ways. They utilized that cash to sign the number 1 recruit in Bryce Underwood, and now they're utilizing that cash to sign former highly touted recruits from SEC programs to come play for them. We're looking at three guys in particular: Justice Haynes, Damon Payne, and Troy Boyles. Justice Haynes and Damon Payne both coming from Alabama, both played significant reps this year, but Justice Haynes lost his starting job midway through the years, and Damon Payne never really saw much more of an increase than 30 snaps per game, which for a defensive lineman is not bad, but he saw himself as better than that and wanted to move on to a program where he felt like he can make more of an impact. Troy Boyles, another highly touted recruit. Now, he was not the near 5-star that Damon Payne and Justice Haynes were, but he was still a top 70 player in the 24/7 recruiting rankings, and somebody that obviously would look and say, if I'm not getting playing time here, I should go somewhere else where I can get playing time, get developed, as Michigan is known as a very developmental program. We'll see if Sherrone Moore can keep that up, but go on from Georgia to Michigan, get more playing time, and be able to see the field more, and obviously make more NIL dollars. Quite frankly, the transfer portal is just leveling the playing field in college football, not just with the SEC and the Big Ten, but so many other schools as well. As we just saw Arizona State take Texas down to the wire. Now, many would say Texas, oh, that's just they had a bad day. But in reality, you've seen this year, Texas does not have very many big wins. They don't have any ranked wins, actually, other than Arizona State and Clemson, who they saw in the playoffs. Clemson gave Texas a good game for the most part, but they failed to really give them a game at the end. And then Arizona State took Texas to double overtime. It took a huge play from Texas to be able to eventually tire out Arizona State and beat them, like I said, in double overtime. The conference that I believe is going to see the most benefit from the demise of the SEC is the Big Ten, as the Big Ten has a financial advantage in a lot of ways, but in one of those biggest ways is their TV contract, which they can use to increase which they can use to invest. I apologize, to invest in coaching facilities and NIL resources, and you're already seeing this begin to happen. Look at lowly old Indiana. Indiana, a terrible program for pretty much all of college football history. One Rose Bowl appearance. They have a winning percentage of less than 50% in their program's lifetime. I mean, just awful, putrid for a Power 4 program. But they get a good coach in Kirk Cinetti. They breathe some life into that program, and now you are seeing Indiana invest in Kirk Cinetti. Is Kirk Cinetti the answer to bring them to a national championship? Probably not. You're not really going to hire a coach in Indiana right now to bring you to a national championship, but he can be the answer for Indiana to become a respectable program, and they are beginning to invest in their program, their facilities, their coaching, their NIL, all those different things. They're beginning to invest more in that side of the program, so that way Indiana can be more of a destination place for recruits and transfer portal players to go to. We're seeing similar things with Illinois as well. Illinois has seen an increase in their investment in the football program, long known as mostly just a basketball school. They're also investing much more in the football program under Brett Bielema, hiring a good head coach for them, an underrated head coach in a lot of ways, and having him come in, build the program, challenge the boosters, challenge the money men, and have them invest not only in the coaching but also the facilities, the program overall. Better coaching and development is going to be what the Big Ten thrives on, as the SEC mostly gets the better recruiting rankings now because of how much more populated the SEC is with, or the South is, with scouts and everything else. The Big Ten, their better coaches will be able to find better players who are underrated, and a player that is underrated oftentimes will stick around longer. Look at programs like Iowa. Programs like Iowa have been known for putting 3-star players, particularly on defense, into the NFL in a lot of ways because they have a good culture. They have a good coach in Kirk Ferentz who has been able to develop that talent and put them into the NFL. You could also look at Michigan and what they were able to do under Jim Harbaugh with putting so many lower rated players into the NFL, building a good team culture, team atmosphere. Penn State has done it as well. Ohio State has done it. Multiple other Big Ten teams have done a good job of doing this. That's just some of the four that I can highlight off the top of my head. But we are ultimately going to see if this works out with Michigan's success in 2024, defeating Alabama, or in 2025, as 2024 ended well for them, defeating Alabama and adding key SEC transfers that solidify their rise to the challenge against SEC supremacy. The Midwest loyalty also will be a huge part of this. As I mentioned, programs like Iowa, Minnesota is up there as well, being able to develop their more underrated players. The SEC's future is shifting right now. The power dynamics, the bias, everything else is shifting right now. Now, we are going to see the power of the SEC shift first. You will not see the media follow along right away. As I've showed you the top 10 teams for next year, it's absolutely ridiculous to have 3 of those SEC teams in the top 10, but it's the SEC bias that exists, and we will have to see, the SEC lose more before we see the media bias go away for real. Now, Paul Feinbaum has started a little bit by talking about how this was a lost year for the SEC, but we're going to have to see if it continues to happen year in and year out. What I predict is going to happen is that the SEC and the Big Ten will most likely shift between who is the best conference year in and year out. This year, the Big Ten has been the best conference. That's been quite evident, with Oregon being the number 1 team in the nation all year. Penn State surprising many people into the semifinals of the college football playoffs. Indiana rising as much as they did. Michigan beating Alabama. Illinois beating South Carolina in their bowl game. Like I said, the Big Ten has shown they are the better conference this year. We'll see if the Big Ten can again be the better conference next year, or if it's going to be the SEC once again. Let me know what you guys think. You guys think that the Big Ten has supplanted the SEC for good? You think they've done it just for this year? Or do you think that the SEC overall is going to continue to dominate and this was just a fluke year for them? Would love to know you all's thoughts. NIL, transfer portal, everything else. Would love to hear from you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Have a good one.